Mary Jane Yates, is the administrator for Contemplative Outreach. And so she's had her finger on the pulse of this organism for some time. So she's the perfect person to introduce us into some of these conversations and talk about who we are at this point. Tell you a little bit about Mary Jane. She describes herself as equal parts water and mud, is how she would describe her spiritual journey before discovering centering prayer and the teaching of Thomas Keating, which happened in 2007. Mary Jane's understanding of the Christian tradition was formed largely by her experience growing up in a white missionary family working in Nigeria and West Africa in the 1960s. The mixed blessing of her Christian heritage continued through her training in public health and subsequent work in the fields of social justice and community development in Edmonton, Canada, where she has lived for the past 30 years. And through the practice of centering prayer, Mary Jane has begun the experience of what Rumi describes as being wide as the air to learn a secret. And that, again, from Rumi, the ocean takes care of each wave as it comes to the shore. She is now deeply grateful for both the mud and the water in her life, as both are carrying her home. And we are deeply, deeply grateful that Mary Jane is here to share herself. I just would add that I'm new on the staff, and so I've not known Mary Jane a long time, but I feel like I do because of the spirit of love and generosity and friendship that she offers to so many. So Mary Jane, we are delighted you're here.
Thank you, Mark. I am delighted to be here too. Actually, where here is for me at the moment is in a motel room in Carbondale, Colorado, which is extremely ironic. It took a bit of work to get across the border from Canada, but I had an excellent reason to come down, and the privilege of being on a 10-day post-intensive retreat at Snowmass before this event. It was my first time at Snowmass, and I felt deeply, deeply blessed to be there. Of course, just before going into retreat, the surprise, we had to make the decision there would be no in-person conference in Denver. So it took a few days to kind of settle into silence and say, okay, everything is going to be okay. And it is. As soon as all of you arrived on screen last night, and the times we've had centering and being together already are telling me it is all okay. So thank you for being here. As I've been thinking about some of the chaos and complexity of this past year related to COVID, I'm reminded that Thomas Keating, our dear Thomas, used to like to talk about how evolution, how the move towards complexity is part of our evolution. It's part of the expanding energy of the universe, is the way he would speak about it. A not so encouraging thing he also says in his little book, God is All in All, is that probably in terms of evolution and complexity, we're only halfway there as a human race. And I'm like, oh boy, so we might have a ways to go. But in that book, he also talks about the principle of conservation of energy. And, I spent time with that during my retreat last week. And the way Thomas talked about it is understanding that energy never disappears from the system within which we are. That if, for example, when a star dies in our universe, what happens is that energy goes into creating all kinds of new life in different places. And I feel so strongly that is what's happening. And, Thomas definitely talked about that. A seed needs to fall into the ground. It needs to die before it can grow and produce fruit. But I think what we're seeing is, the new life that's coming from all the effort and energy and how Thomas did spend his life for us. And here we are, the new growth, and it's just going to continue. So I just want to share a few highlights of the past 18 months or so. I started as administrator in March 2020. And I understand that it's a normal part of these conferences for the administrator to give a report on everything that's happening, including a financial report. Those materials actually are already posted on the website, and there'll be a link in the chat room later on. So I'm not going to review all that, my highlights report, because that would be probably a little bit boring for you. So what the conference planning committee suggests is that I focus on some of the areas of work that have really, I guess, grabbed my own passion and attention over the last year. And so I'm going to just give you a bit of a framework for my talk. So these priority intentions are ones that were already in place with the board when I came on. And so they're ones that kind of bubbled to the surface over the last year as being important, some of the important things for me to focus on. So in this talk, I would really like to just mainly look at the priority of trust and accountability, and I'll explain a bit more about that intention in a minute, as well as global initiatives, because those are two areas that I think I've been amazed at some of the things that have been happening. Underlying all of these intentions, however, and the things that I will talk about, everything is around supporting volunteers. That's our reason for existing as staff with contemplative outreach, and to support the work that's going on in communities. So even though I won't focus on that specifically, I think you'll see that it's understood that there's a lot going on related to volunteer support. Tomorrow morning, the session where there's a panel that will involve prison outreach and outreach to youth and seniors and the 12-step program, they will really be covering some of what's happening in outreach to diverse populations. So I don't really need to do that. And dialogue and partnering, it's an ongoing thing, but for this year's conference, I've just chosen to focus on some of the other intentions. So the first priority or intention of trust and accountability, these words here are from what the board had laid out back in 2016, I believe. Cultivate a culture of self-correction and mutual accountability in a climate of respect for our common purpose among our staff, volunteers, and contemplative community. So, as many of you know, the previous few years before I came on board were years of change. With Father Thomas passing in 2018, there were new changes on staff. There was a shift, I guess, related to the vision and principles, where we were really looking at what does it mean to be a non-hierarchical organism, as we call it, instead of an organization. And so I quickly saw, as I started into the position, that this was a priority to continue to explore this non-hierarchical way of being, the interconnectedness of all of us, and that we all have unique roles and gifts, and that's the important piece of it, to focus on how are we each able to contribute the gifts that we have. So I just want to pull up this slide of our beautiful staff, and some of them may not be happy with me because they don't even want their pictures on our website. But I thought I would just show this slide by way of celebrating the incredible group of people that are serving you each day. As you know, you've met Mark. He came on as our program coordinator in March of this year. It's hard to believe, right, Mark? Feels like you've been doing so much already. Our dear Pamela Begeman, who's still working as our communications coordinator and does an amazing job on all of our newsletters, e-bulletins, also supports teaching some of our online courses. And it's just a wealth of support to everything we do in contemplative outreach. Matt, you see below, and you've seen him on the screen. He's not formally on staff. I'm going to say yet, but that I shouldn't say that in public. But he's on contract with us right now because we really needed support in the technical area. We are still looking for somebody that perhaps can work for us full-time in the area of technical support. But in the meantime, we're very grateful that Matt is supporting us in this work. Marie Howard, you met last night. Honestly, I've learned more from Marie than I think I have in a lifetime from many other people. She seems to have 9 lives. and she has so many stories from each of them. And I've just loved learning the history and the beauty of contemplative outreach from Marie. Kathleen, next on the below, you'll meet her in a minute because she'll give our financial report. She's the next, I guess the next newest after Mark. She started in, I hope I get this right, Kathleen, January 2018. You can tell me later if it's wrong. Not too long ago. Donna Kohlstruck at the top. Many of you have talked to her on the phone or by email. She handles all of our office administration. The database is our database coordinator, and just incredibly beautiful spirit in supporting the work of contemplative outreach. So I just wanted to celebrate with you this group of people, as well as the governing board, some of whom you're meeting during this conference as well. I can truly say I've never worked for a more non-hierarchical organism. Of course, there are places where some of the hierarchy comes in. It's pretty much human nature, but there's such a spirit of openness and love that I wanted to pull that up to celebrate. The next area that really has been, I guess, spoken so much to my heart over the last 18 months. As Mark mentioned, I guess part of the reason this area is so important to me is having grown up in West Africa. Definitely what people used to call us is third culture kids, because I wasn't actually Canadian. I definitely wasn't Nigerian because I didn't even learn the language. And, we were sort of sequestered away in boarding school. But so I guess from that experience, as a young child, you get lots of impressions about what it might mean to work cross-culturally or to not. And so I think for most of my life, I've had that desire to understand what it is to have a genuine relationship of equality and respect across different races and cultures. And I think that contemplative outreach holds that. Definitely because of the principles of non-hierarchical and the depth of the practice that we're in, we know at our core that we're all connected. So it's just such an incredible gift to me to be serving in this organism. So some of the examples of how we've really, I guess, been trying to build on the global initiatives over the last year. I'm not sure how many of you are aware, we do have a global team that's led by Elizabeth Norton Namor from South Africa. This team meets bi-monthly. It was started about 4 years ago, just to really keep the pulse, try to keep a pulse on what's happening in different countries around the world, outside of the US, and also not including Latin America, because as you heard, you'll hear a bit later, that ECI has their own more developed set of supports for Spanish and Portuguese speaking people. So that global team meets bi-monthly, and partly because of that connection, we were able to support the purchase of a laptop for a nun, Sister Lucy, in Kenya, as she's teaching girls in a school there about centering prayer. And that was a delight for us to have a fund that we could support that. And it's that kind of thing where we're wanting to continually be aware of where can we provide support in concrete ways to communities around the world in learning, centering prayer, and in practicing. The last little piece I'll share here is that it was also my great privilege to participate in a Living Flame program with the Icelandic community over this past year. To get to know their community a little more, and the flavor of their groups and the depth of questions and commitment in that group was amazing. So I was just so grateful to be part of that. The next slide, though, is really trying to capture some of the incredible energy that I've also seen develop amongst. You'll see at least a sample of this group on the top right of your screen, the Translation Working Group. This was something that started rather informally last October. You know, I just looked at our list of international contacts, people on the international team, including Helen and Yvonne Cloutier from Quebec and Father Wojciech from Poland, to see if they'd be interested in talking together about what was going on around translating Father Keating's work and contemplative outreach resources. And the response was it was enthusiastic. It was wonderful. And from that small core, then they knew of other people that were working on translation. And so we've just gradually been developing that group. We meet every 2 months. One of our first tasks was to try to do an inventory of materials that have already been translated, which again, completely amazed me. There's been so much work that has already gone on around the world. All volunteer hours and hours, countless hours of translation work, as you know, is very time consuming. And, but the lively discussion, you know, even in this group about the challenge of translating some of Father Keating's work. And, you know, he had some, you know, his language, even for a person whose first language is English, can be challenging, as Marie talked about yesterday. So, you know, this group has come, I see, to be a real support to each other and trying to work through some of those issues. Also publication issues where it's challenging to find a publisher who wants to publish some of these works. So the slide on the bottom there, Teresia Hasanova, and I'm pretty sure she's on our Zoom meeting today. This picture I took with her when we were on a Zoom meeting celebrating the launch, the release of Open Heart, Open Mind into the Czech language. And Teresia told me she had ordered 200 copies, and by the time I talked to her a week later, I think they were all gone, like within a very short time. So it really told us that there's such a passion and an interest there. So I'm grateful for this work. I do want to mention as well, Ray Mueller. You see him on the screen here. He's headed up our subtitle working group, and they have accomplished some amazing things. They produced a wonderful 2-page document and a video by Isabel Castellanos from ECI explaining how to produce subtitle videos in any language, which is an incredible resource because, as you know, we have many, many videos that could be translated. And Ray as well works with a group of English-speaking volunteers to improve the English captions that already are with some of our videos and to work on captions for other ones. So if you have an interest in working on English subtitles, you'd be welcome to contact Ray. Contemplative Outreach of Iceland is now working on subtitling the 6 continuing sessions of the introductory prayer workshop. And they're planning to use that in a fall Zoom retreat. And then we have 2 new translators who have started working on German and Italian subtitles for some of the Father Keating's videos. You know, I wish each one of you could sit in on some of these groups or meetings and hear the passion and understand that the meaning there is in hearing this material in a person's own language rather than always going through the medium of English. However, such a strong value in understanding if we didn't have the language of silence underneath all of this, that so builds this connection beyond language. I mean, that already gives us a big head start in this work. So just before I leave this topic, I would like to go to this video. It is of Isabel Castellanos. Many of you may already know Isabel from Extensión Contemplativa Internacional. She and a few members from ECI have been participating in our translation working group and have been a goldmine to us. And you'll see why. Isabel's going to explain some of their history with translation.
Good morning for me. My name is Isabel Castellanos. I live in Miami Beach, Florida. And my native language is Spanish. I've been involved serving in contemplative outreach for many years. I was board member. I actually served on the board together with Helen's husband, Patrick, for some years, and also in the gift committee. But primarily, I've been working in ECI, Extensión Contemplativa Internacional, the Spanish and Portuguese branch of contemplative outreach, which is the same thing as contemplative outreach, but you know, we sort of have our own special interests and service. We have already started translating many years ago. As a matter of fact, we are already in a 2nd generation of translators. Ilse Reisner, who was our first translator, is already retired. And so we have a 2nd generation of translators. So that's how long our translation tradition has been going on. And also our subtitling. Patty and I started working with Ray many years ago. Ray will remember that, subtitling some of the of Father Thomas's videos. So we do have some you know, history in that. However, I would say that being here in this group is the fulfillment of a dream that I had. Because I did serve, as I said, for many years in contemplative outreach. But I really felt that this was far from being a truly international community. It was primarily an English-speaking community with what started as a Hispanic outreach, literally, but it was primarily English based. And we really were not a truly international community. And to be in this group just fills my heart with joy, because I have been praying for this to come to fruition, because it's the only way really that Father Thomas's works and centering prayer is going to reach a global dimension. And I believe that this is exactly what our world needs today. So it's with great joy that that I'm here today, and I'm here at these meetings. Thank you.
I thought you might be inspired by those words from Isabel that she shared just very spontaneously during one of our meetings about 2 months ago. Thank you, Isabel. So that ends like the snapshot of some of the things that you know have been happening. Only a few things. There are lots more, so make sure you look up that report and read every single line. But in the meantime, I'd like to invite Kathleen to give a short presentation of our some of our financial situation.
Thanks, Mary Jane. And I just sit here, we're putting Joseph back. I just sit here with such gratitude, having gratitude to you, gratitude to all of the presenters, to the planning team, to the folks who are sorting out the IT for us. Really, many, many, many thanks. This could be the portion of the event where everyone truly wants to go to sleep because the number crunching isn't everybody's favorite. But one thing that I wanted to explain before I get into the slides is a little bit of how in the financial portion of contemplative outreach, we've moved from a non-hierarchical paradigm into a teamwork. And that is, we have both an investment committee and a financial team that meet periodically throughout the year and discuss the financial matters. So it doesn't rest in one or two persons' responsibility. That just feels important for you to know that within the organism, even especially in the financial area, in terms of transparency and working together, that's how we do it. When I joined contemplative outreach staff in 2019, the organism was already in a very strong financial healthy position, and thankfully has continued to be so, because as you can see here, of the first of all, the work of the volunteers, and financially, the donations and gifts from people. Our major income comes from donations that we receive throughout the year, both from our circle of friends who are large donors who give over $5,000 a year. And then we have folks who give bequests, and then folks who send money in throughout the year, $1, $5. It's such a blessing, and it's such a grace and beauty to behold. And it's an amazing, amazing thing. So the financials, which you can find on the website, the highlights report that Mary Jane mentioned has two links in it. One is to the P&L from 2020, and the other is to the balance sheet that shows all of 2020 and the first 6 months of 2021. So that highlights report is on the website, and you can access it by just putting in highlights report in the search bar when you're on the contemplativeoutreach.org website. Please take a look at that for more detail on our numbers. So the first slide was where the money comes in, the different areas we receive it from. This is how the money goes out into the world. Now, when you say general and administrative, that is not simply salaries. That covers a wide range of things such as bank fees and rents and travel and some different things. So don't get the wrong impression when you see that number there. When we look at the financials for Contemplative Outreach Limited, we see a very healthy and thriving organism, and it's because and thanks to all of you. In 2021, we will have this added expense of the hotel, that we had a cancellation fee for the hotel, which was just under $40,000. And that being said, once again, your wonderful generosity. We've received over $20,000 in donations for this conference. So many, many thanks to all of you. That's probably everything in a nutshell about our finances. I'm very grateful to be doing this work, and Mary Jane once referred to it as sacred work, which most people would not think of number crunching as sacred work, but I like to hold it that way, and I hope that you'll all support me in holding it in that light. And thank you once again.
Thank you, Kathleen. And I just echo what you say about the incredible generosity of people in this organism. And also the shifts that are happening. I mean, you will have noticed from Kathleen's figures that our spending was definitely under our income last year. And that was partly because of COVID, because normally we would have a bit of a budget for staff to meet together. Unfortunately, I have to say, Kathleen is the only staff member I've met in person so far. I had hoped to travel a bit and meet each other or have us all gather in one place this last year, but that just wasn't possible. So we know things will be a little bumpy over the next few years as we figure out how our spending patterns really might shift depending on where COVID goes. But again, just thank you for the generosity of all of you. So I would like to move now to the next part of the presentation, a bit of report on the community conversation project that happened earlier in the summer. So to help me with that, Brian Aldworth should be in the audience somewhere, and I just would love for Brian to say hi so I can introduce you. Okay.
Hi, Mary Jane.
So I'm just starting into the slides about the story project, but I just wanted everybody to meet Brian because he was a key member of our small working group that worked with the responses that came in for the stories and helped to write the report that you can also find on the website. And Brian will be coming back in about 15 minutes, I hope 15, 20, to tell a bit more of his story of hosting conversations in South Africa and what the process meant for his community there. And so we'll see you in a few minutes, Brian. So this was sort of the title that we gave this whole project, really trying to understand how contemplative outreach is emerging in this time. Because we definitely had the sense, because now we're connected so much more by Zoom, that there's so much going on around the world. But there wasn't an easy way for people to tell more in depth the story of what's happening in their area. So we created a little template, a little questionnaire that was posted. You'll see the link to the conversation guide that's here on this slide. Was basically based on these three questions. What is happening in your community? And your community could be defined as any group that you meet with that's focused around centering prayer, contemplative practice. So it could be your centering prayer group that you meet with weekly, or your chapter, or some of the service teams completed a questionnaire, or at a country level. So it was at any level of community. What is happening? So what was the question around what differences, what impacts are people seeing from the activities that are happening? What difference is it making? And then that third question of now what, which is the idea of what do people sense is emerging for their group. So I also have on here an example of one of the groups that met for a community conversation. This picked photo of the Zoom group is from Manatee, Sarasota County on the Gulf side of Florida. So this group here sent in their conversation response and as well as a screenshot. And I just thought it gave a lovely example of what I think the value of this conversation has been to some groups, and the idea that this wasn't meant to be a one-time conversation, that the guide is there available for your groups to use at any point. You know, if you're really trying to figure out, sensing the need for a bit of shift in the way your group is meeting, what you're focusing on, how you're reaching out to others, anything at all. It's sort of that reflective process that might help in the formation of your group. So this group here, the smiling screenshot, is from the service team meeting of centering prayer groups in Florida, as I said, Manatee, Sarasota County. And I just love this photo. It was sent in by Stephen Hoffman. And what he wrote with this says that their centering prayer groups have flourished in the last 18 months. Our team really practices non-hierarchical formation by revolving leadership that encourages friendship, mutual concern, candor, and enjoying one another. And we can see that in this photo, the love and the joy that's coming out from this photo, I just was really touched by. And several other screenshots were sent in from people with their stories, and I can't show them all here, but just wanted to give you a sample. So to give you a sense of who responded generally, here's a map, sort of a typical Google map that's got the spots marked where all the responses came from. We had all kinds of different responses from individual prayer groups, newly formed online groups, or clusters of groups by language or culture. We had about 90 source documents that came in from 26 countries. And they were all submitted in English, although a number of them had been translated from original languages. Certainly a number of conversations came in from ECI that had been translated, and Italy and various places. So gratitude again to the translators who did that for the project. So the spread was really around the globe because we had from Korea all the way to Hawaii. Although there are still many gaps, we know that there are lots of communities that we didn't hear from. And so that's an ongoing question, right? How best to reach out and just understand more what's happening around the world. Find out, you know, if there are initiatives or ways that people want to be involved. And so what we've decided, I'm quite sure, I have to chat with Maria more about this still too, but the email address is still active, story@coutreach.org. It's a very simple email address. So if you're on this meeting today and you even think, oh, I want to host a conversation with my group, or they don't have didn't seem to get a response, for example, from, well, I know there's a group that has been meeting in Zambia. I've heard that there are groups meeting there. And so if you happen to know someone who would have a story that they would like to submit, or you yourself want to take time to do that, we're still welcoming stories. This is an ongoing sharing, right? Because our stories are always shifting. So once we received the stories, there was a small group of volunteers, again, amazing folks, who helped look at all the responses, sort of group them according to category, and look at the themes that were coming out from these stories. So that's what I'm going to dive into now. So under that first question, what is happening? I felt like this picture kind of said it all, you know. It's like the year of COVID. So certainly most groups that responded talked mainly about meeting virtually. The amazing thing was the dedication and the commitment. Like, people kept going, met on Zoom however they could for prayer. And many people talked about going to more than one prayer group a week now because they could, you know, so many available on Zoom. Online retreats, introductory workshops, so many things happening on Zoom. However, this photo tells such a beautiful story about how people, wherever they could, still tried to meet in person. And just to let you know, this photo is from the chapter in Westchester, New York. They said, starting in October 2020, we practiced centering prayer after 9 a.m. Mass, sitting outside the old stone church at St. Patrick's in Yorktown Heights in New York. This occurred weekly as long as the weather was above 30 degrees Fahrenheit, that is, and no snow. Our members ranged in age from 70 to 91, and our numbers varied from 5 to 12. We continued meeting through the summer. Originally, we had started in 2013 in a small church classroom. We've maintained our practice of centering prayer that's followed by Lectio Divina. But then they also talk about what added to their practice was a monthly Zoom meeting presented by the chapter of Westchester, headed by Diane Harkins. And so every second Saturday, those who were on Zoom would meet for 2 periods of centering prayer, a speaker, and a dialogue. So the way this group describes that, the Zoom meetings for those able to handle the technology were a blessing. They were retreats and watering holes of faith in the desert of the pandemic. And I thought that was such a beautiful description of what these Zoom meetings have meant to many of us through the last 18 months. So to think about some of the positive impacts of this, you know, the growth, really there has been growth in the number of groups meeting and the number of people participating. That was a very common theme from the stories. When it came to impacts, there were beautiful stories as well about the impact on personal practice. People felt that when they knew they had these regular gatherings they could attend on Zoom, it encouraged them to take up their practice in a bit more consistent way. A deepened listening and empathy for others, praying across boundaries and language groups. That was a very common theme people talked about as being a positive outcome. Expanded view of God and unitive consciousness. And the last one around shared leadership. It wasn't a really strong theme in the stories, but people definitely talked about how leadership is being rotated now more on Zoom because it's much easier to do that, right? You know, people take turns of bringing the reading or, you know, sharing the content, right? So that was quite lovely because that fits with one of our principles as well. And I put this photo here, by way of sharing a very personal story about the deepened connection that has happened over the last year. This photo was sent to me by Jill Bennett, who's in the UK. She's a coordinator for groups in London. And she's also sits on the global team for Contemplative Outreach. And she sent me this photo in November of 2020. And what is in this photo is each year in November, their parish writes out the names of people who have transitioned during that year. And they put this scroll up in their church for the whole month. And Jill had added the name of my beautiful partner, Rod, who had passed away last summer. And you can't quite see his name under all the flowers there, but she wanted me to know that she was thinking of me and of both of us during that time. And to me, that was just an incredible example. And I've heard, I've experienced other examples like that, but I've heard other people experiencing that kind of depth of empathy and compassion. I think that this challenge of COVID has brought out in all of us. We just are taking more time and understanding and being there for each other, I think, during this time. So it's just absolutely lovely. I just put this up as reminding us that, it's not all rosy, which life never is. And it wasn't designed that way. But definitely this time has been challenging for people who are not connected to Zoom, are not online. This is a beautiful little note I received in the spring from a person who's been practicing centering prayer for about 20 years and met Father Keating, but now lives in Idaho Falls, where he doesn't know other people that are practicing centering prayer. And he's not using online, doesn't get those resources. So he just wrote this a beautiful thank you note for the hard copy mail-outs that we do from Contemplative Outreach, because it's his main source of connecting with other people. And I think it's an important reminder. There are many people not online, and the challenge of inequities of access to community during this time of COVID. And, there are some of those inequities are not related at all to COVID. They're just realities. Tomorrow, you'll hear more from the prison outreach team and how, the challenges, the incredible creativity that it takes to really cross some of the boundaries, the barriers there are to reaching people who so feel a part of our community, but have a very difficult time in connecting. So quickly onto the emerging vision. Really the idea of all the positives you heard earlier, that's what people want to keep doing, keep growing and sharing. A theme did come out about people wanting to try more online retreats, because that hasn't really become too common yet, but for those who have done them, they're working. Continuing to deepen our empathy and sense of belonging. And another interesting piece, strengthening commitment to service. So there were some, pretty clear themes, I think, that came both from what the positive impacts were and what people want to see keep happening within our communities. Support's needed. So I'm putting this slide up and going back to Julie's talk this morning about expressing our inner core of goodness and really the transformation that does happen as we continue in the prayer. And that is, I think, coming more in touch with our gifts and what it is that ways that we really do want to serve. And so just popping this slide up here because I think as we think about the needs around the world, again, we'll be talking a bit in small groups about some of your responses and other ideas that you might have that weren't mentioned here. But think about how even in our local prayer groups, we might support some of these needs. One I'd like to point out on an international basis is the engagement of diverse voices in revising and updating contemplative outreach resources. And it links back to, I think, what I spoke about earlier is related to Thomas's passing. You know, Thomas apparently used to say when people would ask him, who's going to replace you, Thomas? He would say you and you and you and you. And if he were online today, he would go through all 300. I don't know how many of us are online. But I guess I just would like to say as well from my work with the Translation Working Group, there is so much potential for continuing to build on Father Thomas's message and the new messages that are coming out. Julie's presentation this morning expanded on, I believe, in a wonderful way, some of the teaching that Father Keating left us. And, you know, expressing things in different languages, it will be incredible to see the learning that comes out of that for the rest of us. So I would just encourage you in thinking about your own personal practice and some of the lessons or the teachings that you feel might be important for the wider contemplative outreach community, to please reach out. That is part of Mark's role too, as program coordinator, to support development of different voices and sort of see what's emerging in our practice worldwide. And I would like to hand it over to Brian and invite him to share a bit of his experience in the groups in South Africa in sharing stories and what this project meant to you. Brian?
Thanks, Mary Jane. In South Africa, each chapter and regional coordinator took the conversation to the various sub-chapters and prayer groups. This information was then collated into a chapter document reflecting the views expressed, and these were sent to CO Limited in the USA. Although the response was fairly low, it gave the leadership a better idea of what was happening in the chapters as well as in the country as a whole. During the first few months last year, during hard lockdown, all group meetings ceased. Gradually, Zoom groups started being formed, and then mini retreats and mornings of recollection, etc. A number of people joined Meditation Chapel, a number of groups of just elderly who were very unfamiliar with technology and using virtual platforms ceased meeting. Technical support was given where requested or available, and from the comments received, most were very positive, despite the restrictions and accompanying trauma, isolation, and frustration because of the pandemic. Judging by the responses, it would seem that many people experienced a deeper and more meaningful prayer life, slower and less distracting. A growing compassion and empathy also seemed to take hold due to the hardships caused as a result of COVID. Many people were happy with the way things had been adapted and are curious as to what will happen next. Quite a number of our groups are bilingual or multilingual. All the introductory pamphlets on centering prayer, Lectio Divina, and the welcoming prayer have been translated into Afrikaans, which is a daughter language of Dutch. An adaptation of Open Mind, Open Heart was developed into Afrikaans, but in a format that Dutch Reformed Christians were comfortable with. The title translated is Prayer of the Heart, Gebed van die Hart. A positive aspect of increased online options is that it means one can take advantage of a wide range of resources and connect with many different groups. A negative is that many seem to lack technical ability, its age, access to and cost of internet in this country, power cuts which confound schedules and planning. But there is also a resistance to using the internet for spiritual life. Some of the comments we got was that centering prayer has been better than years of therapy. We love the new way of doing United in Prayer and would like it if it could be done the same way in future. Also globally, I feel a definite sense of a united living community which is building connections amongst its members and establishing links and friendships that span the world. And finally, I am deeply devoted to contemplative outreach, and my greatest wish is that we can be instrumental in changing the lives of others as our lives have been changed. Now, 18 months into the pandemic, people are beginning to realize that nothing will be the same again. There is a recognition that some groups are stagnating, some are getting smaller, and we are all getting older. Outreach and the growth of centering prayer is thus very important. We haven't yet done any virtual introductory workshops to prayer, but I'm quite certain the national leadership will start preparing for these. Forming groups out of a virtual workshop could be easier, as participants can then form Zoom groups, which takes away the complications of where in-person gatherings could be held. Zoom mini retreats, half a full day, have been offered, but not longer virtual retreats. As restrictions ease, all coordinators and facilitators would like to see a hybrid type of gathering happen. There are a number of options. Number one, individuals could continue with just Zoom meetings. Number two, there could be in-person and Zoom meetings running separately in particular areas. Number three, there could be teachings, workshops, and longer retreats given in person and virtually simultaneously. Number four, this presents a unique opportunity to get younger people involved, as well as those people who are marginalized, and also better into spiritual dialogue and connection, although these are already happening in some areas. Number five, in May next year, we will hold our national conference and retreat on the East Coast over 4 days, restricting the number to 40 people, but it will also be broadcast to the wider community. All of these happenings are and will continue to be communicated to centerers via email, newsletter, or WhatsApp. Technical support and technical know-how is crucial in developing hybrid style gatherings. But over the past 18 months, quite a number of us have learned to navigate Zoom and WhatsApp for these virtual meetings. It could be a truism that the wealthier and more self-reliant a country becomes, the less they turn to God. In this country and globally, people have lost jobs, friends, family, and so on. And it seems that more people are turning to God. In our poorer African communities, where joblessness and lack of income has increased, I have observed an increase in faith, as well as Ubuntu, in the sense of helping those who are already struggling in their communities. My observation is based on numerous conversations I've had with all sorts of people, white, black, poor, affluent, in the area where I live. People are not afraid to talk about their faith in God. Now, I want to finish off with a little story. I live on a farm some kilometers outside of Bethlehem in South Africa. There are quite a number of families around us living in little communal clusters who are seasonal farm workers or who are employed at the canning factory near us. As there is no bus service here, a number of guys provide a taxi service to people wanting to get into town. We call them 4+1s, as they take 4 passengers and a driver, and they are usually very old cars. Our slang for that is squirrel, squirrel. My car has been in the workshop for 2 weeks, so I've had to rely on these guys. Amandus, the guy I normally contacted, his car broke down in town. I then called Maxwell, and he took me where I needed to go. I asked him about Amandus's car, and he said he was there yesterday trying to help him. And this was from a rival taxi driver. This is Ubuntu, or faith in action. That's my story, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Brian.
And thank you, Mary Jane, Kathleen, and Brian for sharing with us and giving us a better sense of contemplative outreach as an organism, a growing organism, and also calling us to consider for ourselves what the call of the Spirit is to help us further embrace the world.